Welcome to Risk Rhythms, the podcast that keeps you in tune with the latest trends, insights, and conversations shaping the world of risk management. I'm Dr. Hermie Leroux, and today we're diving into something exciting that every risk professional needs to know. Welcome to the second edition of the IRMSA Risk Rhythms podcast, where risk meets reason. Today we're going to discuss the geopolitical landscape and what impact it has on South Africa and how we can actually deal with it. And before I forget, my name is Dr. Hermie Leroux, and my precious guest today is Mr. Sanjay Bana. He's the second vice president of the IRMSA board, but he's also a very seasoned risk professional with experience in many industries. And I also want to like to welcome Ms. Yvonne Mutibi from IRMSA. She's the Chief Executive Officer, and she graciously agreed to stand in for our president, Ms. Nicola Cominos, who could not make it today. So guys, thank you for being here. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your patience while we were setting up. Today is a very difficult topic for all of us, but it's because it's not as if it doesn't reach your pocket or the pocket of your organization. We're going to discuss geopolitical challenges and how it actually affects every South African, every African, every international person. So I thought I'll set the scene by saying, remember years ago we were speaking about VUCA, that the environment is vulnerable, it is uncertain, it is complex and ambiguous. And now we moved into Barney, where it's not only a physical war that we're fighting, it's also a psychological war. How will people survive? And all of us think that you're going to walk through a war zone and then your survival instinct will kick in. But we are here to actually help everybody, our society, to give them guidance in order to help them to survive this crisis. So please, welcome to all of you. Welcome to all our listeners. This is such a privilege. For the first rendition, I was out of my skin with excitement. This time, I'm also very, very excited to speak to all of you. So, Yvonne, can I start with you, please? You are the IRMSA CEO. The IRMSA stands for the Institute of Risk Management Southern Africa, and you're also a leader. So when you think of the global and the national risk landscape, and you think of what's happening in the environment at the moment, what advice would you give to leaders in terms of surviving these challenges?
Yeah. So I think the first and foremost point that I want to get across, and thanks, Hemi, for the second episode of our podcast. Of course, this is, like we already stated at the beginning, a continuation of much more rich engagements for the benefit of the broader society, but of course, posing it and posturing it for the benefit of the risk management industry in particular to better equip, harness the skill sets, transfer knowledge that is necessary, to navigate these kind of complexities that we are facing today. And having said so, just recently we had a radio interview. So this is a very important topic that I think every person today in South Africa is now challenged to firstly question themselves. What does this mean for me? Apart from leaders who are, viewed or perceived to be people who are leading organizations or the government, I think every single person actually is a leader. Whether you are leading from the perspective of being the head of the family, being the head of your classroom somewhere, being a foreman somewhere, every person is a leader. So this message is actually directed to each and every person who takes the chance to listen.
We live and breathe.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I think the first point, let's just, pass this one. This is not a distant geographic war. This is a real structural, economic, systemic risk for South Africa. It has already hit the shores of South Africa. The last conversation I had on radio, we were talking about, how far of a distance, is this going to start hitting our pockets? But reality is it has actually come to hit us sooner than we had anticipated. So we should, step out of the that mode of laxness, of being relaxed and not, wanting to follow up as to what is happening, doing something about it. I think this is a pivotal time for leaders to start engaging on scenario planning, contingency planning, and really putting together, some setup that is going to ensure that business continues, as we are now, having to deal with uncertainty and disruption of supplies, particularly on key resources that fuel the transportation and logistics, to get resources, transported, to get food supplies transported, to get people, to get to workplaces, to get to hospitals, so on and so forth. So it is such a real risk that we're dealing with.
Can I just interject quickly? Because I just want all of us, all the listeners and all of us to remember that we already survived COVID. We are the generation that survived COVID. So we were already in a situation where we had to make a plan. So I don't want to put it in any fancy terms. People, we are faced with a situation as organizations, as living and breathing human beings, where we actually have to make another plan. So what you're saying now is, hello, all of us are in the same boat and we actually have to make a plan. The second point I want to make with regards to this, if we refer back to the IRMSA Risk Report, it spoke about societal polarization, which means that the divide between rich and poor becomes larger. And if you don't have the attitude of how can I help, it's going to become worse. And secondly, we also highlighted infrastructure failure. We highlighted things like all of the conflict, state-based conflict that will have an impact on our ability to live. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a time where we need to actually come together as a people, as a country, as business, government, civil society, business, to get our minds together as to how do we navigate this turbulence. So certainly we're going to pick up on currency fluctuations that, inflation is going to go high. Already people are starting to panic. And that is the key message that we should be sending, that during times of uncertainty and complexity such as this, we should avoid panic. Rather, direct your time, resources, and talks around plans that we can have in place as contingency, as we're looking now to, compete over the scarcity of oil distribution. Given the Strait of Hormuz having been shocked as it is, what it means for us is, what other modes can we activate to still have work carried on, distribution carried on, without necessarily, fighting over fuel. Because what we picked up over the past days is that people have actually started to pile up fuel, or with fear that we're running out of fuel. So that's one of the ways that we can actually activate right now, as we did during COVID. You'll remember that people panicked and started piling up toilet papers and all of those things, essential supplies.
More of a necessity having toilet paper than it was having fuel.
Absolutely. So we need,
It is king.
yeah. So please, I think it's not a time for us to panic, but a time for us to collaborate, a time for us to put up contingency plans, business continuity, that is.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I think that's true. So Sanjay, from your point of view, what would you say? Because you're also a leader in your own right. What advice would you give other leaders? But also, as Yvonne rightly said, you are the head of your household, or you are the head of your community in general. So panicking is not an option. So survival, I think, will kick in, and people will want to pile up and stock up. So what advice would you give to people on a practical, boots on the ground level?
So I think let's begin with the fundamentals of the basics at all. What do you need to live? You need food, you need water, you need transportation, and you need some form of cash flow. So if one looks at all of this, what's going on, the question is, how does this impact those basics? How does it impact the money I earn, the money I spend, and what might I need to change in order to continue with my standard of living despite these or given these changes? Because let's make it practical. in the last week or so, I've seen 1 or 2 WhatsApps going around where people are showing this WhatsApp of this gentleman that's at a garage, and the price of diesel has just gone through the roof. And I think his bill was something like 2,000 something odd rands for a tank of fuel. And this gentleman's like complaining
For
how
Uno.
no, for a bucky. Yes, I wish it was for an Uno. But probably we might, I don't know if we're going to get there. But the reality is that if your bread and butter is based upon transporting goods and services from point A to point B, this individual now went from probably about an 8, 9, 10 rand increase in their cost of fuel. So how many tanks does he fill every month? That extra money is now going to take away from other areas that he was spending that money. So it's a case of reprioritizing that. If one looks at, but we've been through this again. In COVID, you weren't allowed to go shopping every day.
And then we got 60-60.
Yes.
And
Okay.
because due to 60-60, there's all these e-commerce lines.
Absolutely. So
that
there's
actually,
so there's lots of stuff out there. It just boils down to practically. I mean, I like to keep it simple. What's it really going to impact? Money.
Yeah.
And if it impacts money, it impacts everything. So I've got to literally go back and say, okay, now hold on. How am I going to run my household with less and still meet my requirements? And then you can have the conversation because it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fundamental basis of that. If one looks at this from a community perspective, take it away from my home and go to my community. Everybody has got their own fair share of problems. This is just going to make some of those problems a bit more apparent. And the question, like we did in COVID, like we did in previous situations where you had to come together as a community to solve community problems, this is going to force us to come together again. So the question is, okay, how are we going to work together as communities to shelter those and to assist those that they're already struggling? Everybody's going to struggle, but how do we help each other out despite our struggles? And that's probably the conversations that need to take place if they're not already.
and for many people, it would be counterintuitive because the other day I was having a conversation with somebody who said, you take care of yourself first. But I said to him, how selfish can you be? Hello, there are other people next to you. So rather put on a broader scope and take care of your community as well.
So those principles will come in. Yeah. And then also, I think a lot of things that happened in COVID, people started baking their own bread at home.
Yeah.
They started growing their own gardens.
Yeah.
They started doing a lot of things to become self-sufficient. Now, yes, because COVID's no longer there, we've sort of gone back to the old way of doing things and getting that. But my point that I'm trying to make here is that we had to move away from what was convenient and adopt a few inconveniences in order to continue. We're going to be faced with the same situation. And that's a conversation I think every home and community needs to have that says,
and organization.
And organizations. What was so convenient for us up till now that we're going to become inconvenienced about or with?
Yeah.
And how do we deal with that inconvenience? Something that just in preparing for today, the one thing that kept on prevailing in my mind is the world over the last decade, or the last 2-3 decades, the industrial age, was all about...
Sanjay, but you're old. 2 or 3 decades.
Well, but the world has shifted from, we used to talk about industries being in a town. Now industries are across the world. Just-in-time development, least cost.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if we take the Middle East out of the equation and look at everything that's happened prior to the Middle East, the message has already been, sorry, friends and colleagues, but that global supply chain right now is broken. It's not working well.
Don't you find it interesting? Years ago, we were singing all the praises for the global village.
Yeah.
Oh, people, we've got access to everything because globalization is so wonderful. And now suddenly it is interrupting our lives as we know it. Now globalization is actually working against us.
So I think that the biggest challenge and our biggest risk there is comfort and convenience. When you become very comfortable because of the conveniences you have, you tend to ignore certain things which you need to take into account and prudent things. And for me, this is an inflection point for us locally and globally that says, what have I taken for granted as a result of the global conveniences, then I now need to relook and say, it's no longer about convenience, it's about continuity. And there's a big shift between the
Yeah,
two.
that's exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
So-
in agreement with you,
Yeah.
Brian. That's exactly what she said. And I just want to make that point, people. And I said, I'm not going to be all serious. Please let this not result me in having Maltabella for breakfast again. People, I really truly hated that as a child.
Yeah.
I really don't want to eat it again.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But can I just interrupt you there for a moment? And if you think of organizational structure, we think of governance.
Mm.
Governance, we know, if we think of risk management as well, there's a technical side to it and a structural side to it. And if that is in place, you should be able to build agility into your governance structures and also resilience and agility into your organizations. So if I'm going to go to youth first, in terms of agile governance, do you think we are ready to deal with the challenges that's coming our way with this geopolitical risks that actually now have become a reality? It's not a risk anymore.
Yeah. Now, actually, situations like this, Hemi, it's an acid test to our state of readiness to dealing with uncertainty and large scale risks as we see them today. The proof is in the pudding. The only one time that we can truly get to say we're ready or not, and I'm not the person then to say we're ready or we're not ready. This very test is going then to either confirm or validate or deny as to whether we're ready. But the essence of it really for me is having a government that is going to lead from the front, because unfortunately we are led by a government, and that government is now taken a construct of a GNU, which is, a coalition government. So this is a critical time for different parties of this government to actually think of the people and the people first, and put aside their
I
differences.
applaud you. That is
Put
true.
aside their differences. As we speak now, we know that there's a bit of camps within the leadership in terms of who supports who globally. And I mean, the war that we're experiencing is a global war, and yet it informs our very fabric here locally. It informs our stance, it informs our political party and the policy direction that we take as political parties. So this is a time that we really should put aside those differences and start thinking of where is this taking us? What does it mean for us as South Africa? And that's where structurally, as you speak of structures, structurally we need to be alive to the alliance that we agree on out there. Whom do we want to align with out there in terms of our strategic partners for support as well as supply of key resources? Reality is we need the globe. The globe needs us. We can't live as an island,
Isolation.
right? So we need to foster these relations such that they're going to assist us during these times. And as we try to use that, global strategic alliance to foster this continuity that we're speaking about, we should also, on the flip side of risk, be speaking what opportunities is this presenting for us? What advantage can we actually explore out of this situation for the benefit of the country?
Okay, but you're
Particularly,
saying what
particularly that
advantages-
we've always been taking a stance of a neutral body, not explicitly been found to be on any side of the camps as we see them today.
But
globally
now you
vetted.
know I'm going to ask you about those opportunities. What opportunities do you see, or do you see any opportunities at the moment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what's happening now is maybe let's unpack what are the key shockwaves that we're experiencing out of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. That channel actually is it transports about over 60% of fertilizer in the world. Fertilizer, we need that for what? For agriculture. So what it means is people who are in the agriculture space who need to be growing crops to supply our food essentials in an end, we're going to be struggling a bit because we don't have the sufficient fertilizer to grow crops, that we need to supply the demand, at the right level for everyone to have something. What it means is there's going to be shortage of supply from agricultural point of view. Now we're going to end up fighting over maize meal, cooking oil, over potatoes, over those things, over wheat, because we won't have sufficient fertilizers to grow large scale as we have been. Apart from that, obviously, so now let's speak now to the opportunities. Now, this is now the time when government should actually stand and say, how do we activate quickly, your small, medium enterprises in agricultural sector to ensure that we have the sufficient resources and reserves for South Africa to have ample supply, also stocked up, just not just for immediate supply, but stocked up, because we are also exporters largely in agriculture. So that is going to obviously now give us an opportunity to export more than we would have, because those would have relied on suppliers who benefit from the the fertilizer coming through from the Strait of Hormuz are going to look elsewhere in terms of diversification for that very supply. So that's one big opportunity for us.
That is great. Thank you for that. We always think of what can go wrong, but we seldom or ever think of what we can do. And more of survival is within our control than we think. So there are a lot of things. I mean, if we have to think, Sanjay was joking about how old you are, but I also can revert back to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 decades. So we're in the same place. So I want to ask you, from an organizational resilience point of view, we've got so many ISO standards, and the proof is really in the pudding. So whether you think you've got an ISO standard is not going to help you here. So from an organizational resilience point of view, do you think we're ready?
So I think we're better prepared today than we were 5 years ago. Let's start there as a base. I think the one thing that COVID did was it forced organizations to inherently build in some resilience capabilities to what they already do. So it forced us going from international suppliers to what can we do locally, and diversifying, bring some supply chains locally. It forced us to think about logistics differently. It forced us to start the process of becoming self-sufficient. And that in itself is building resilience. Now, what happened in COVID, and probably as the COVID signs came down, is the area that we need to go and have a conversation on, leaning onto the earlier point I made around becoming very comfortable. As we became more comfortable, did we relax those things? So those things that we put in place over COVID, how many of those did we relax and now put on the side that we now need to reactivate? So I think those are the one set of conversations that we need to have and the areas that we need to work on. The other thing about resilience is you're never perfectly resilient. It's always something that you're becoming better at from time to time. So from this, right now, I've been sitting with the same question in my own organization. And the question is, well, how are we resilient? How are we going to be able to surf through this and make it work? And the truth of the matter is that we don't operate in a linear world anymore. You talked about Barney, brittle, anxious, non-linear, and something that's incomprehensible.
So incomprehensible, people, for those of you who don't know, is that's what it is.
I could never understand.
You don't believe what's going on around you.
So the only way to work through a world like this is to be consistently sitting down and saying, what are the potential scenarios in front of us? And how could this play out? Because in order to become resilient, you need to first go back and say, well, what bets am I going to put on the ground? What am I going to take? What am I going to do in order to become resilient? And at a practical level is, well, where in my business model do I need to bring about changes? We talked about importing. Now it's about nearshoring or local content. We talked about logistics, moving things from point to point. There's the cost of moving things from point to point. If you're looking at what's going on in the world right now, also from a resilience perspective, it's How long does it take to get something here? South Africa imports a lot of materials. So from that perspective, now all of these conversations need to come in, and that's where resilience comes in. That says, okay, hold on, I've still got, in my case, I've got a project to deliver. Okay, now let's go back and look at this project. What buffer do I have in place right now?
Yeah.
What are the potential things that are going to eat away at this buffer? I know costs are definitely going to rise, so it's going to eat away any cost buffers that I've got. But then time buffers, I'm importing things into the country. I'm dependent upon the supply chain. What do I need to do in order to save this thing? Or still, if it's within my buffer, I'll survive it. But the moment it goes outside of my buffer, what am I doing right now in order to minimize the impact on this overall project or program from a time, cost, and a quality perspective? So that's where resilience comes in. It's about in my mind, it's about what options am I putting in place right now to help me deal with what might come my way? Yeah.
And I think in an organizational context, some people fix their revenue streams, but then your cost base is now going to go up. So how are you going to survive that?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many organizations build the buffer into their revenue stream as well. And that is maybe where things are going to go be tight.
Absolutely.
In terms of delivery.
Absolutely. I think just to build onto that as well, Harmy, it's not the earlier conversation that you had around governance. But one of the biggest things about resilience and agility is your governance. The more you control, the tighter you control, the less agility you've got.
Absolutely.
And the lower your resilience, because everything is command and control. So one of the biggest conversations and the difficulty that organizations faced in this context and leading to this context has been for everybody to go back and say, well, hold on, where am I over-controlling? Where am I putting too many controls in place? What do I need to relax? Where do I need to create autonomy for people to do what they need to do? Yeah. And I think those are some of the critical conversations from a governance perspective we need to have. It says, where am I enabling more autonomy? Yeah. Still sticking within my risk appetite and tolerance, but where am I enabling more autonomy so I can govern, but give people the ability to do what they need to do in order to make things work in the circumstances they've got.
So that people can make a plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we always want to hold people accountable, but we don't give them the power to actually make a decision.
Absolutely.
And we collectively in leadership, in management, will have to have a quick mind shift.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise your organization will not be here tomorrow.
Yeah. May I add, because I think this is a very important point that Sanjay just alluded to. So many of our organizations at this point, and also going back to our government, it's just now in February that we passed the State of the Nation address, followed by the budget. So our cost of input into our productions and processes and all of those for immediate to medium term are likely to be impacted. Well, largely, I beg your pardon, largely to be impacted by this disruption. So already, as a point of what do we do next, we need to revisit our plans. We need to revisit our plans. We need to review the cost that we've tied or locked into our budgets, because as we speak now, the cost of everything is escalating. And the duration to which this is going to be playing out, when you look at it, this conflict is heightening every time. Whilst Trump has issued a 15-point, de-escalation of the war agreement to Iran, Iran has rejected that. Iran came back and said, no, we're not taking your...
For you to decide on my behalf.
Yeah, we're not taking this. This is not going to work for us. In fact, they gave a counter, cease of the war agreement with their 5 points, and one of which they said, pay for all the damage you've caused. Yeah. So I think the point there is to say this is going to be a long-term impact that we all are going to face or to feel and experience. So the plans now should not just look into the immediate or interim relief. They should look into, yes, immediate relief. How do we restructure our plans? Given that a lot of things, like Sanjay said, we import. including the likes of pharmaceutical products, medicine. We import medicine. So our people are going to be stranded, first because they cannot afford Panado anymore, because we import, or the cost of it has gone up.
I'm telling you, if only we only needed Panado.
Yeah.
Some of us need more.
Also, actually, yeah.
We don't only need Panado.
Chronic medicine, right? Chronic medicine. So that is the kind of warfare that we are facing, and I think we need to start prioritizing, even stratifying in terms of proportionality from the companies that, like your Discam, that are issuing and dispatching these medicines. How do we spare enough for everyone? Because people are going to be flocking and buying in bulk because they are fearful of what the future holds. So we'd all need to build in that resilience to say, how much will we need to last us the next year or so, right? And start diversifying our sources and supplies. If we used to get much from the US, maybe we need to start speaking to China, to Australia, to others to get same supplies.
No, I agree with you. Now, if I think about it, all of us have a personality type. Mine is to hide my head in the sand for a few months and then get it out and then make a plan. So I would implore all of you that are listening today, really, people, we don't have time for putting our heads in the sand.
Yeah.
We must just respond. So moving away a bit from governance and the organizational structures and the resilience or buffer, like you put it, that we actually have to build in terms of being a leader in today's society. If you think back of our IRMSA Risk Report and what we identified, one of the risks we identified is weak leadership and the impact that that's going to have. So we identified that before all of this is transpired. So if we were worried or concerned with weak leadership, what leadership capability would you say would actually help people to move forward and remain sustainable, Sanjay?
So, I'm tempted to literally lean into Cynefin as a model. You talk about the 4 quadrants, and then when you go into literally chaos, and in chaos, you need somebody that can bring order immediately to the situation and just stabilize it. If you're dealing in the other quadrants, you need people that have got different abilities. So my answer to that is there's no one answer for all in terms of leadership. I think every institution, be it business, be it society, be it home, whatever you are, you need to go back and you need to say, where am I? We know we're not dealing with known knowns anymore because we're dealing with known unknowns. Now, the question is, well, from that perspective, is scenarios going to help me? And what sort of leadership do I need across these different scenarios in order to help me move forward? And that would be the one conversation. So it's not a one size fits all. If you're in that space,
but
if
you
you're in a
agree,
space, yeah,
it's going to take more emotional maturity than ever before from leaders to actually provide direction for people, direction for organizations.
Absolutely.
You can't sit and in your office and just think, oh, there's going to be a tomorrow. There's not going to be a tomorrow if you don't take action.
Absolutely. So again, it goes back to, it always comes back to, there's that term, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the question is,
you what?
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I heard you can't eat strategy for breakfast. I thought that's also a good saying. Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes. So
just put that in normal.
So organizational, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if the culture of the organization doesn't enable that strategy, it's dead in the water.
Yes.
And the same goes for leadership. So the question is, what sort of leadership has created the current culture? Now we need to shift. Looking at what's going on in the world right now, we need to shift from a very linear way of operating with lots of certainty to a world in which the amount of uncertainty is growing by the second. There's a different form of leadership there. There's a different culture that's associated with that. In one world where you have a lot of the answers to the current world in which we don't have any of the answers, or you may have a few answers. So the question is, firstly, what sort of leadership should we have in place to deal with rising levels of uncertainty and complexity? And the second question that's equally, if not more important, is what culture are those leaders going to drive in our organizations? Because it's a combination of the two. It's the leadership plus the culture that will determine whether you succeed or fail.
And that is the thing.
That's the critical element now.
I always say to people, who creates a culture?
Mm.
People. So who should change the culture?
People. But it starts
It's
at the
as
top.
simple as that.
Yeah.
Mhm. And one of the biggest traits that we need to have as leaders today is being pro-risk, that we question everything through the lens of risk management. And that's how what we did so beautifully during the times of COVID, when we had risk-adjusted plans, a risk committee, and all of those things. Those mechanics and structural arrangements worked very well for us. So again, this is a crisis, and we need to activate those models. And not just to activate during times of crisis, it should be an embedded practice when you speak of culture, that we think of risk.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And that thing that we always say, call to action. People, now is the time to act. It's not the time to play games anymore or be too important to get involved. None of us are too important to get involved. All of us should get involved. Sanjay and Yvonne, thank you so much for a very insightful conversation today. Sanjay, do you have any parting and concluding comments regarding this issue of geopolitical risk and how it's affecting us on a day-to-day basis?
I think my parting shot or my parting words to everybody, leadership included, is you opened with it. We've moved from a VUCA world to a Barney world. It's brittle, it's anxious, it's non-linear, and it's incomprehensible. This is not a world in which there's answers and there's no knowns. The only way we survive this, the only way we thrive through this, is by literally looking at the world through a different set of lenses. And that means leaning into scenarios, understanding what could potentially happen, good and bad, and then finding what are those common things we must do across all of those in order to increase our likelihood of thriving through this. And I'll leave there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Good advice.
Yeah.
Yvonne?
And from my end, I think just, to bolster onto what Sanjay already mentioned is we need to be considerate of the extent of risk, external, internal, all round, scanning the horizon. So this, like we in one of our risk reports, which we issue every year, and please be on the lookout for this year's risk report. Whilst the current one is still very much relevant, look into that. It does talk about some of these scenarios where the sensitivity around energy supply, and of course now that is manifesting. Now, the purpose of risk is to warn you before actualization of scenarios. So we've warned the society, we've warned the government and business that this was going to happen. Now it's happening. The question is, what mitigating factors have we put in place? Being forewarned is being forearmed. What have we done? Right. So my message then to business is, please, let's be curious. Let's gather as much information that is important for our strategies, our livelihood of the business, for our continuity. Let's gather all of that, because that is intelligence that we need to embed into our strategies. So now, with risk embedded into the strategy, such devastations that we are now encountering as a result of this global war, should not have a material hit or shock onto the system, your own business system, that is. Right, because we would have built into it response strategies, so on and so forth. So there's very few companies that will make it through this crisis, and it's companies that are for risk. They appreciate risk, they embed and entrench risk, right? And like during COVID, a lot of companies closed because they did not think of risk, in strategizing and carrying out their plans. So I think that's my big message to business, and of course government. Let's replicate that which worked well for us during COVID. To society, let's build our own resilience communities with farms that supplies us locally. Let's rely on each other. for assistance, let's know who can assist during times of medical need. Who are the nurses? Who are the doctors? Who are people who deal with fire? Let's get to have that information. So information becomes very powerful during this time because it directs us towards the right cause. So gathering that, having that in place and knowing who does what helps you to have an ecosystem end to end and understanding role players across this the span of the ecosystem in risk management. For risk managers, it's time for stress testing. It's time to really go back to that risk register. What was our call to action? Our call to action was leading from where you stand. It is time to lead from where you stand, right? Really driving that board conversation. Having the necessary rigor at the level of the board to bring about bad news that is actually good for the business. It's time to do that. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it's really time to make a plan. And it's being counterintuitive because if you want to take care of yourself first, this is a time to be selfless. It's a time for collaboration, for conversation. It is really not a time to just take care of number one. So that will be my parting words and call to action. Please, people, take care of each other. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you guys, and thank you very much for technical support. It is wonderful. We can't do this without everybody in the room. And we'll speak to you soon about something that will change your life. Thank you again for bringing practical advice and giving that call to action to every single part of our society.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Remember, risk management isn't just a profession, it's a rhythm. Keep moving, keep learning, and keep leading. Subscribe to the Risk Rhythms podcast on your favorite platform, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay resilient and stay in rhythm.